Hello, everybody. Welcome to the leadership lunch. Unfortunately, Lillian's in Cleveland with other national staff and conference staff, but we'll get going anyway. Will you join me in prayer? Ever-present and loving God, as we enter this season of Lent, we are mindful of the path that Jesus took, not for physical comfort or political power or spiritual pride, but as a servant leader, a teacher and healer. Remind us that although our journey may be difficult, your presence will never leave us. In your many names we pray. Amen.
Pleased to join with you on this lunch today. My name is Andrew Warner, and I'm serving in a new role on your conference staff as Director of Finance and Development. So pleased to be with you all in the Michigan Conference and with my new colleagues across the state. I want to think with you about Ash Wednesday, and I found it interesting that as the development director, I was asked to think about theologically Ash Wednesday. I guess, maybe I was expected to say, you're all going to die, write your will. But I have some other things I want to say too. As I thought about Ash Wednesday and the image of ashes, I was struck at first by the way in which Ash Wednesday sits in the liturgical year between the Advent, which we slowly light candles, Christmas, when we hold candles and sing Joy to the World, Epiphany, when we celebrate the light of Christ. All these images of lights comes crashing to an end with Ash Wednesday burned out. And then slowly we start picking up the energy of light again, the Paschal light on Easter, and then the tongues of flame on all the disciples on Pentecost. So there's this back and forth between light and burnout that goes throughout the liturgical season with Ash Wednesday is this really interesting pivot point that happens in the middle of the season. I also think it happens in an interesting thinking of those seasons, interesting lineup that the incarnation, God becomes human. Ash Wednesday, we remember our humanity. The resurrection, God will not forget humanity. And so there's this interesting kind of remembering that's going on around what it means to be incarnated. I'm also, mindful of the way that the phrase that we say on Ash Wednesday, the kind of quintessential line of the evening, remember you are dust, and to dust you shall return, echoes a story that we never actually read on Ash Wednesday, the story from Genesis 2 and 3 of Adam and Eve. And that's the story that's in the background of this day. It's what we hear, of course, at the expulsion when Adam and Eve are sent out of the garden. God says, remember you are dust, and to dust you shall return. That's where our words come from, 3,000-year-old words that we've been saying forever in our religious tradition. But also, it reminds us of the beginning of the story in Genesis 2 when God created Adam and Eve out of the dust. And so there's this dustiness that hangs over the whole tale. And I wanted to lean into that to understand what was going on in Ash Wednesday. So often we tell the story of Adam and Eve as a story of perfection and then loss, paradise loss. They get kicked out of the garden. But I want to follow Walter Brueggemann, who looks at this as really the Bible in miniature, a story of creation, transformation, creation, transgression, and redemption. And it's just the Bible in miniature. And the Ash Wednesday gives us a chance to think about that whole scope of the Bible. Brueggemann would say that at the beginning, Adam and Eve had a vocation, till the garden. They had abundance, eat everything, and a limit, but not of this tree. And so they had this sense of call, this sense of abundance, and a sense of boundary. And at the end of it, it all gets restored. They have work, but now with sweat. They have abundance, but now with toil. They have a limit, they're out of the garden. But there is a restoration, even in these first couple of verses, in this little chapter. So when I look further into that story, it strikes me that Adam and Eve's story is a story of forgetting. What the snake asked them to do was to forget their humanity. That the core problem say, of our sin, is this act of forgetting. It's also what happened, of course, with the golden calf in the Exodus story, that the Israelites forgot that God led them out of Israel, that there's a level of forgetting that's inherent to the Christian understanding of sin. The calf and the snake are two sides of the coin of sin, tails of the snake and heads of the calf. But both the coin of sin is that act of forgetting. And it strikes me that in our culture, we are so often wanting to forget sin and wanting to forget even mortality. And so this Ash Wednesday calls us to an act of remembering. Niebuhr wrote a lot of things, but Reinhold Niebuhr from our tradition talked about what happens when we are forgetting our humanity. And he says that humans become evil at the precise moment where they pretend not to be, when they pretend that their wisdom is not finite but infinite, that their virtue is not ambiguous but unambiguous. That is, that what we're forgetting, when we forget about sin, when we forget about our mortalities, we're forgetting that we're limited, that we start to pretend that our judgments are divine judgments, that our biases are divine biases, that the way that we see the world is the way that the world truly is. That's an essence of human sin that now has been combined with an amazing power to enact it. And so we see that the ways in which we're able now to combine the sense that our prejudices are divine with the power to implement them. And that's the root of the sin that we see in our world. Teresa Sanders is a Catholic theologian who's done a lot of reflecting on what the liturgical tradition means in light of the Holocaust. And one of the things that she points out is that the Wannsee conference, where the Nazis devised the final solution, actually took place on Ash Wednesday. So the final solution began on Ash Wednesday, a time when they thought of turning people to dust on this day when we remember that we are dust. So in writing about what the Ash Wednesday might be after the Holocaust, she calls us to acts of remembrance. And this is what she says. Perhaps the admonition of Ash Wednesday should not simply be, remember you are dust, and to dust you shall return, but also remember all those reduced to dust by the point of a sword, by clouds of poisonous gas, by bullets or bombs or slow starvation. Remember them, and let their ashes turn you away from paths that lead only to death and destruction. It's not enough to remember that we ourselves are dust. We need to remember also that we have unprecedented powers to murder on a massive scale. So Ash Wednesday reminds me of my limitations, what I might want to forget, but also reminds me to remember not just my own mortality, but my connection to all the rest of human creation. That is, the temptation to forget is to pretend that I've made it on my own. Oh, this is my turn. I'm sorry. I promised I would connect this to philanthropy. So the way that this connects to philanthropy is that forgetting invites me to pretend that whatever I have, I've gotten on my own, that I've made it on my own, that I am a self-made person, that I've lifted myself up by my bootstraps, that it is all mine. That's what happens when I forget who I am. But remembering makes me remember that I'm connected to other people, that I'm deeply and profoundly connected. So forgetting, I think it's just me, but in remembering that I am dust, I remember that I'm connected to all the other dusty ones that God loves and that I'm called to love.
Thank you, Andrew. Awesome. Lots to think about. So we've got some awesome panelists here with us today, and we'll open up the conversation with. They have a few moments to answer some questions, but I'd like them to introduce themselves. Andrew, thank you for introducing yourself. In case people don't know, I'm Cheryl Burke, Associate Conference Minister for Clergy Care and Formation. And let me get us started with our panel. Reverend Sameerah Shareef, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and why this topic's important to you?
Good afternoon. I'm going to pardon myself in advance, so to speak, if there's any technological glitches. I am senior pastor of St. Stephen's Community Church in Lansing, Michigan. I'm also honored and privileged to be a certified nurse midwife. I do women's health care, and I'm blessed in that capacity to do that work as well. I always say that I have three callings in life: mother, midwife, and minister. So that kind of encompasses everything that I do. Love Ash Wednesday for many reasons, and uh, I think we got a Brother Andrew gave us a wonderful introduction to the topic, because I think that so often we forget the real meaning of Ash Wednesday and its power to remind us of who we are and whose we are and the responsibilities that we have. So before I start talking anymore, I think I think that's probably enough to start with.
That's
Thank you
great.
so
Thank you.
much.
Yep. Greg.
Boy, that's well done. I'm Greg Watling. After being in Wisconsin Conference for 20 years, I'm over here in Michigan now. So, Andrew, good to see you again. I am at Gaylord First Congregational Church up here. And also, part of the reason Lillian asked me to do this is because I work half-time at the church, and the other half of the time I work on the removal staff for a funeral home. So I spend a lot of time with people who have someone who is passing away or who has recently passed away, and the whole funeral process, what the funeral home does, and those kinds of things. So I think part of it was to bring some knowledge base. I don't know a lot, but I know some of what the funeral business looks like. So that's why I'm here and who I am.
Great. Thanks, Greg. EJ, I'm just going in the order you're on my screen.
Yeah. Thanks, Cheryl. And thanks to Andrew for the opening remarks, and hello to all of you gathered here today. It's good to be together. I am Reverend E.J. McGaughy Stibe. I'm currently located in Cereal City, Southwest Michigan. Was raised in the Southern California, Nevada Conference of the United Church of Christ. And I'm going to talk about what it was like to grow up in an open and affirming congregation during the AIDS epidemic, because that significantly impacted my understanding of death and dying, and how we remember each other in the midst of that process. So lots to share today and lots to learn, I hope, in being here. Thanks.
Thanks, EJ. And Lori.
Hello, I'm Lori Tupper. I'm not a minister. I'm married to a minister. And I believe the reason I was invited was because I have a terminal diagnosis. I was told 3 years and 3 months ago that I had 2 to 4 years to live. I have stage 4 metastatic breast cancer that it has spread to my bones. And I think that's why I'm here, to talk about death, is my understanding.
Thanks, Lori. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to just kind of throw out a question, and whoever you want to answer is great. Why don't we start with our conversations around death and dying? It tends to be something we don't want to remember, we don't want to talk about. Do you have any ideas about how to conversations around dying?
Well, I've always found it interesting that as people whose faith hinges upon the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, that we are so uncomfortable talking about death. And depending on what our personal theology might be, I've just always found it really interesting. I think, at least for me, when I've had conversations with people in my family as well as in my congregation, it sometimes boils down to, it's not so much of not wanting to talk about death as it is about the way in which we lead up to death. Do we have a disease? Is it going to be an accident? Am I going to suffer? So it becomes more of those questions, the manner, if you will, the manner in which we die, and us not necessarily knowing that really it's not the process of death itself. Is there going to be any suffering, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the way to have conversations is to simply have conversations. And that sounds simple, but I know it's difficult. But I think that's really, it's just got to be put on the table, so to speak.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Greg, what kind of conversations do you have at the funeral home with folks?
Sameerah, that's a perfect lead in the conversations. Part of the reason two of us on the removal staff are pastors is because every family is so remarkably different in how they deal with the person passing away. Certainly their circumstances, whether it was sudden or they'd been in pain a long time and they'd been sick, certainly their age. One was a murder and a couple have been auto accidents. So I mean, you can imagine the responses of the next of kin, if you will, is kind of all over the place. But what I would say is most true across the board is the number of people who've never had a conversation about it. And so they really get, for lack of better words, they get flummoxed. They don't know what to do. They struggle with what to say. There's a couple things we have to do legally when we get there. But people who want to be nowhere near where you are when you're doing the removal, some people want to be right there and help you carry the person out the door. Some people are like, I'm going to be in the other room, knock on the door when you leave. I mean, there's all kinds of things, even when someone has died, that we have such a hard time having a conversation about death in general, even in the midst of someone who's recently passed away. So yeah, I was thinking the same thing, conversation. If we can have conversation with our people, not just about all the legal stuff, and we got to do that too. Honestly, that's another mess, but even about what it's like and what it's about, and we ignore it most of the time.
Go ahead, EJ.
Yeah, I was like, I agree with what's been said, like how do we improve the conversations? I mean, like we got to have them is like really my like first instinct. We have to actually have them. And, I'm a sex ed facilitator and, I'm having the same conversations when it comes to like, your kids should not be coming into their adolescence or teen life and becoming, sexually active and having conversations about sex for the first time. It's bad practice. Like, we got to start talking to young people about these things as they're developing language. I was thinking about, I was talking to my colleagues before we jumped on the phone about how I was at Fat Tuesday dinner last night with my kiddos. We were having a cooking lesson, and there were two of us pastors there. And so we were able to kind of shape the transition from Shrove Tuesday to Ash Wednesday and just simply letting them sit with the question of like, why do you think it's important in our religious tradition to sit with the fact of our mortality, with the fact that all of us will die someday, and they held this like very kind of mysterious silence and nobody solved the silence. But I think just putting the question in front of them was really important and just supporting them in it. So I would say like what would be helpful is age scaffolded approaches to talking about death and dying, like the age span of life, over the age span of life, and building up a literacy in our young ones over time.
Thank you. Lori, what has been helpful to you or meaningful to you?
Well, I grew up in a very conservative church, the Nazarene Church, and I noticed as a child that everybody got excited when they sung the song "When We All Get to Heaven." What a day of rejoicing that will be. And I heard old people testify they couldn't wait. They're so excited, but nobody really wanted to be first in line. So when I got my diagnosis, I have been very intentional talking to my family. I presently am a member of a death and dying support group, and that's real. That's where it gets real. That's where honesty comes out, and I feel I can be my authentic self. So I think it's very important. People don't want to talk about it. I love to talk about it. But people don't like it when you say, I'm Lori, I'm dying. You want to talk about death. So I don't say that very often.
Yeah. So have there been, can you think of a meaningful conversation that you've had with folks around death or dying?
Me?
Yeah, well, sure, you can start.
Yes. Every other Tuesday with this death and dying group, which happens to be through Healing Circles, which is Commonweal in California. every single time we meet, we all just feel like it's been a meaningful, wonderful, great conversation. We talk a lot about options because we're all terminal. So we've talked a lot about VSAD, we've talked a lot about MAID, we've talked a lot about suicide, other suicide issues, as well as how to prepare, as well as, you know, the importance of a death doula, which I do have. And, you know, that group is imperative to my existence, actually. I can die well because I'm living well with that group. Conversations with my kids. My daughter wrote me a letter right after I was diagnosed that was beautiful, made me cry, and I still have it and I still read it. Some people do not want to talk about it. My son is a little bit more reticent, so I try to respect that, but he respects me enough that he will sit and listen to our conversations. So I think you have to kind of feel what people are comfortable with. But I don't think it hurts to be honest about your own life, because when someone finds out that I am terminal, that the first response is always, I'm so sorry. And my response to them is, it's okay. I've had a great life. No regrets. I'm okay. And I think it's important for people to realize death is just the natural cycle of life, just like so many things in our world. We're part of those things.
Thank you. Other thoughts, meaningful conversations you've had, or difficult ones?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. I think
Yeah.
none of us have died, obviously. We're right here, so we don't actually know like what it's like to cross over. We may know what it's like to be pronounced dying, but like the actual transition into death is a holy mystery as far as I can tell. And so I think sometimes the conversations are difficult because of the mystery of it. Like there are only so many things I can say because I don't have personal experience with that. So, you know, our tradition has some things to say. I've been bedside and had my experiences there, but like on some level, the limits of language may actually be about our limit of access to the experience itself. And so I actually find that like centering mystery in those conversations feels really honest. And I have appreciated the people with in my life, like my father was clergy and died when I was 13. And I remember feeling at the time as a young person, like there were the people that were lying to me, and then there were the people that were willing to just be in the mystery with me. And the people who were lying were the people who were telling me like, this is what death means, and this is why it's happening, and all of that. And I was just like, wow, you clearly like have some playbook. I don't. You know, but like the folks who were holding on to the mystery with me and being present, like I'll just share this really quickly because of who's in the room. You know, I was in a hospital room with my father. He looked at me and he said, I just got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I was 12. I looked him in the eye and I was like, are you going to die? And he looked at me and said, yes. And like my world came apart. But the first thing that happened when I walked outside of that hospital room is I saw the two clergy people who serve my local church running down the hallway toward me. And they scooped me up and they held me. And I will tell you that that is liturgical action. And that's even more than a conversation could ever be. Right. So sometimes our words fail, but presence is huge.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to just talk real briefly about what I think is a kind of unique thing that I get to attend to, if you will, being a midwife. I've seen really short lives, so to speak. Positive pregnancy test today, a few days later, bleeding starts, miscarriage happens. Literally every possible point in life prenatally, I've seen loss and seen death and worked with families through that, through my work as a pastor, seeing people die at different ages and stages. So I think it's a constant reminder for me, yes, that the conversation needs to be had, but also the understanding that it can happen at any point. Because I think as a society, we have this idea that, people shouldn't die until they're insert whatever age, and then and so then you get, if people live beyond that point, it's almost like society has an attitude against them because why are you still living, you know? And then the other end is that, we have people that die very, very early before they're even born and, at very young ages too. So I've had to sit in a lot of different spaces with people, and definitely people have different conversations depending on at what stage the person died.
Mm.
I've had well-meaning family members tell someone that's had a miscarriage, oh, it wasn't really a baby, you were only 10 weeks along, whatever, or, you're young, you can have more babies or something like that, and not willing or able to sit in the space with the person at that time. So I think that's something that I remember just quickly, I remember my best friend's mother was being cared for at home with hospice, and then she died, and my friend called me, could you come over? Of course, no problem to go over. And what it did for me as her friend to be able to attend to her mother after she had died, and cleansing the body and getting things ready for the funeral home to come and receive her. So I think sometimes we miss, because we don't want to talk about it and we want to avoid the conversation of death and dying, that we miss some of the very things that we need as human beings, and certainly those of us who are blessed to do clergy work, we miss that opportunity for that experience to grow us, so to speak.
Mhm. Thank you.
Mhm.
So can we talk a little bit about why people are afraid to die? And maybe on the flip, I don't know if I want to go here. On the flip side of this, um, talk about those people who will die by suicide or take their life, who want to die. And maybe that's a whole different question, but what are some attitudes you see or feel around fear of death? Or go
I
ahead,
can,
go.
I can start. I don't know if I'll do both, but I'll start with the
Yeah.
first. It made me think of a story. I was very young into ministry. Oh my gosh, I was 20 something. And this woman, who was just a delightful, wonderful woman, was deathly afraid to die because of some minor transgression she'd done when she was like 8. She was 90, I think. And it was almost convulsions she was in a fear of judgment. And all of the years, you pastor a church for years and you get to know your people, and you know, and you never realize that um, this message people have received about what judgment looks like, and when judgment happens, um, it blew me away, and it's stuck with me now for almost 30 years. Just remembering this sweet lady, it was something the equivalent of taking a piece of candy somewhere. I mean, it was really that, and she'd raised children, she'd done all sorts of great things, she'd active in her church and all those kinds of things. And here she was in her deathbed, afraid that God wouldn't accept her.
Mhm.
It's crazy to me.
Mhm.
Crazy is a bad word, but I mean, it's just, it broke my heart, is the way to
Yeah.
say it.
And sometimes it's church that causes that fear, huh? Mm. What else would you like to say before we open it up for questions or whatever? Um,
I'll jump in again because I guess if I've learned anything in this 2 years of working at the funeral home plus 30 years of ministry, but that everybody's just different about these things. And so you can't have a one size fits all. And some people want to talk directly and they want to talk about everything. I had a woman who just passed not too long ago, and she had me out every other day, and we talked really bluntly about everything that was going on. Um, then there's other people who want to do a little less of that, and all the whole spectrum. And so just to be sensitive, and earlier one of you mentioned presence. There's something about the ministry of presence, of just being there and not having much to say, maybe doing a lot more listening, or a couple of questions has proven well in every situation that I can think of.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to hop in again too. I think a couple things come up for me before we, get into conversation. The first is I would love to hear more from Sameerah about the place where birth and death meet, because I had an experience one time of holding a newborn and watching someone die in the same day. Like my colleague had a baby at home. I went to that house and held that newborn in my hands. And then like 2 hours later was at hospice holding somebody's hand as they died. It's like tending the bodies of the newly arrived, tending the bodies of those crossing over. And I gotta say, the energy feels really similar to me in the room. It does not feel like the coming and the going is from a separate realm. I will say that much. And so that is one of those mysteries that I keep in front of me at all times, that like, I don't know how that works, but it feels significant. So that's like one thing. And then the other thing I want to say is that I'd be remiss not to say that I think one of the reasons that dying is scary is because certain kinds of death are terrifying. And because of the moment that we are in sociopolitically right now, I just need to say that, like, as a parent of a trans person, I live in a fear of one of my children being taken out of this world violently. As a person who is co-parenting with a Black man, I worry constantly about him being taken out of this world violently. Like, there are so many inequitable death dealing realities in this world that make death more terrifying for particular groups of people by no choice of their own, but just because of the way that systems of domination and violence exist in this world. And so I think that just has to be on the table when we talk about why death is scary. That feels important. And then the other thing is, like, I've had times in my life when I've wanted to die, and I think it wasn't depression. It was because life is so hard sometimes. And I think it's a very natural thing to not want to be here sometimes. And I think there's a spectrum of people who experience that desire to not be here. And I hold it with a lot of compassion and tenderness, because this world is full of a lot of really hard shit. Which is also something I'm staring at on this Ash Wednesday with a whole lot of clarity, given what marginalized communities in particular are facing.
I'd like to say something, if it's okay. EJ, I appreciate your comparison of birth to death. I often will use that. I feel every day that, and I can't remember the term, but as a woman begins to give birth, the membrane begins to thin. And, the thinner it gets, then eventually she gives birth. You guys probably all know that. But I have often told people, I feel like I live that way every day. Sometimes I feel like that membrane is very thin between me and the next world. And sometimes I feel like it's effaced. That's what it is. Sometimes I feel like it's 95% effaced and I'm ready to move on. And some days I feel like it's only 5% effaced. And I think realizing that helps me to live each day differently, based on how I feel, of course, because that's my big thing is fatigue. So I can only do one thing a day. This is my one thing. So
Yeah.
Thank you for referencing that, EJ. That's a really important point, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I sometimes imagine death as being born into a new place or a new way of being. And some of us don't want to go there, as some babies don't want to be born right away, right? They want to hang on. Who wants to go into that unknown place? I don't know. Sameerah, you want to respond to any of that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing to consider. Because for me, having seen again life lasting for very short periods of time, or my own grandmother lived to be 102. Birth and death, I think for a lot of people, as Reverend Cheryl just said, death is being born into another realm that we don't understand. And it's their faith and belief in that next realm that makes them okay with the process of going. Um, and I think for a lot of babies, I would say, the babies that have been born into my hands, I always say that they're fresh from the hands of God when they're born. We haven't messed them up yet. They're brand new people. They're freshly baked, and now they're out and joining us. Um, and for me, it reminds me of my responsibility as a human being with the impact that I potentially have on these new human beings that have come into the world. So when you've experienced that, I'm stumbling right now, but I can't find the right words. When you've held this baby, as the baby comes out, the way that I attend birth is the baby comes out and goes right to mom. But sometimes in the process, I feel them take their first breath. I feel their body shift, and even their breathing, their circulation, all like that. But they go right up to mom, and there's something about that process, because I feel like when we die, this is my personal belief, when we die, God takes us up into God's hands, just like babies are born into my hands or their mom's hands or whoever's attending. When we die, God has us in hand. Even the and I This is just again my personal belief. Even the most horrendous, horrible, awful deaths that happen, I still believe that God meets us there. And those of us who remain, we're impacted by it, and we're moved, hopefully, to uh, some form of justice, or wanting justice for whatever ever have happened to this person or these people. But because my faith informs me that God meets me at that point, and that God meets everybody at that point, no matter what manner of death it is. We're being reborn back to God. I don't know if that makes sense, but in my mind, in this moment, it does. But that God takes us in God's hands again, just like God sent us through our mamas, to the earth side, so to speak. So hopefully that made some sense somewhere. So
Thank you. So Lillian's here. Hi, Lillian. And I want to open it up to anybody else. If you've got a comment, question. What are you thinking? Say hi to the little one. Lillian, you want to bring us greetings? And
Yeah, but I can't do it too loudly because I'm at a meeting in Cleveland.
I didn't know
I
you were
snuck
in the
off.
meeting. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I missed y'all. Y'all are having a deeper conversation. Oh,
Yeah.
don't say I said that. But I mean, I'm just kind of amazed at the wisdom in the room as I was listening, and
Yeah.
very much appreciate that.
Thanks. What have been some of your experiences around this? Dan, are you speaking? You're muted. Make sure you're not muted if you're trying to say something.
I was just encouraging Lillian not to talk with her mouth full.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Uh,
So
necessarily, I would draw attention to my comment in the chat. Being an ordained minister for what, 36 years or some such length of time, I've done my share of funerals, but perhaps the hardest was the one for a little 4-day-old baby getting called to the hospital on Christmas Day, no less. Day when families are sharing gifts and As Christian people, we celebrate a very special birth among us, and there goes PD to the hospital to uh, visit the omega side of the life spectrum. It was hard, real hard. It was hard to leave my family on Christmas morning, and it was harder still to be with the family.
Mhm. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
And I'd say it's okay that it's hard.
Yeah. I'd share an experience I had when I was probably 18 to 20 years old. I'm not quite sure exactly, but really impacted my understanding or my sense of what dying might be about. My brother's best friend and his mom and dad were and his brother, I can't even say this right. My brother's best friend's brother, mom and dad died in a plane accident. And I had known, and my brother's best friend was left without his whole family. And I knew the mom through singing in the choir with her over the summer when I was in college. And about 2 days or so after the death, she came to me in a form that I would say was as real as all of you here on screen, and said, "Let my son know I'm okay." And that kind of experience, I know people have those experiences all over the place, and we don't talk about them much. But it assures me that something is there after death, that we don't die and are gone to nothing. It's still a mystery, right? Who knows exactly what that means? It might have just been my brain, but it felt pretty real to
No,
me. Yeah.
I believe in that. And I think as pastors, you know, we it feels to me, just anecdotally, it's like each family or group gets one of those visits. So like the husband might be grieving the loss of the wife and like he would love to get that visit, but it comes to like a cousin or a sister or somebody else, but it's like somebody gets told like, please tell everybody I'm okay.
Yeah.
It, and you hear enough of those stories as a pastor.
Mhm.
But sometimes the person who's like the most grieving, like who wants it the most doesn't get it, you know?
Cheryl,
Yeah.
I just,
So,
I grew up in a large, extended, mostly Eastern European family, and I was exposed to death at an early age. Nobody ever hides it in that culture. And in fact, the person is usually laid out for viewing at home. And so you live with that loss of that person very intimately. And I appreciate growing up that way because death doesn't scare me in particular. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm always more comfortable doing funerals than the one wedding I did. So when I talk to families, I just share, I don't know what's going to happen. And if somebody told you they know, they're lying to you because none of us know. That doesn't mean that God isn't with us. That doesn't mean that you don't have support. It doesn't mean that something bad happened to that person, but it just means we don't know yet, but we will someday. And I go on from there. And the other piece that helps me is I didn't need the church to tell me about resurrection. My first training as a biologist taught me all about it, because that's what biology is. It's birth, death, and rebirth all around us every day in everything that happens. And if we could just embrace that, I think we all might live I can't think of the word to use, but a life of better understanding and less fear.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. What else? Panel, you can keep speaking as well if somebody's spurring something on for you, but
Yeah, I'd love to jump in about congregational care, if I could, in the death and dying process, because I just have to say that in the summer and fall of 1994, in my childhood church of Claremont United Church of Christ, like we went through a season of death that was like one hit after the other. So a beloved elder in the church died. Our pastor's daughter died of AIDS. My dad died. Another, like there was, I mean, but it was also during the AIDS epidemic in which people were just dying all the time. I mean, it was just constant. And we didn't have an awareness then like we do now about what that was. And so it really was the most formative experience of my childhood socially, I have to say, like that and the police violence against Rodney King, because I grew up in Southern California. So just those two things. And my congregation, I'm like one of those unicorn people in the LGBTQ community. I never experienced religious driven homophobia until I left my hometown. Like I grew up in an affirming church until I left town, which is not something I ever hear from anyone else in my community. But there is power in the fact that a bunch of people in my community were dying, and the response was not stigmatizing. The response was like wraparound care, from physical to emotional to spiritual, like all of it. And that was an incredible witness. I have to say, like, there's a reason I'm still in this denomination, and that has a lot to do with it. Like, I watched what the people of God can do when we come closer at the threshold of death and preach the love of God at that place. Like that transformed my life. And I know it's possible, and I can't unknow that. So for what it's worth, I just wanted to put that in the room.
Thank you. Awesome. Yeah, we started out talking about how church can cause fear of death, but it also can help us embrace and talk about how we can love each other more fully. That's awesome. So I think we're at the 10 minutes before and supposed to do a blessing of some sort. And then those that want to continue to meet, we can talk for a little bit longer. But Lillian, would you like to give us the blessing?
Oh, sure. Gracious God, we ask your blessing upon us. Give bread to those who have none, a hunger and thirst for justice who have plenty. Bring comfort to those who grieve. Bless us in our transitions, always in and out of life in all forms. For you, Lord God, created us before time and space and physicality ever existed. You are greater than every reality we experience. And we give you thanks for that blessing in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. So thank you all. If you need to leave or would like to leave, you can do that anytime, but we're basically finished. But if you'd like to continue conversation, what else is on your mind?
Thank you so much. I'm heading to the afternoon.
Okay, thank you, Sameerah.
Buddy.
Good to see you all.
Yeah, I got to tend to my little one too. So
Okay,
thanks.
blessings. All right. Just
Well, you know that part of my upbringing also gave me my weird, and Cheryl knows this, weird sense of humor that's very dark around death.
but
But
yeah, but I think that seeing the body, where people are so